first in Egypt, it was the palms that were used, and in Rome and in the European countries, it was the fir and the pine trees that were used to put up these things, and they would put up the gold and silver balls to represent the sun and the moon. Okay? So, mistletoe is no longer hung over the sexual orgies of Rome, but it finds its way hung over the doorways to solicit a kiss if one be caught beneath it with another. So, yeah, we've toned it down a little bit. Ivy and holly no longer grace the rooms of debauchery, but now grace the doors and the rooms where parties take place. The Yule log that was from Scandinavia that was used in the worship of Thor now burns in the fireplace, and we have songs about those Yuletide carols sitting by the side of the Yule log singing songs. The thing about the Yule log is, from what the stories were, is that they would put the Yule log on the fire and set it on fire and put all the children to sleep, and then they'd remove the Yule log during the night and put up the tree, that the Yule log became the tree. So it's kind of a neat little piece of history there. Children await Santa Claus or St. Nicholas, one coming from Norse mythology as the deity Odin, and the other raised by fairies and elves in the forest, whose love of children and his toy-making prowess, while assisted by the elven folk, made him a saint. There are too many stories about Santa Claus and St. Nicholas to put down on a piece of paper. This is kind of a superficial study, as a matter of fact, because the pages about Saturnalia are extensive, and if you ever just Google Saturnalia, you'll spend a lot of time reading about it. So, while the celebration is no longer a rowdy, immoral affair, its pagan roots remain firmly embedded. Even Christians know, or even that Christians that know that it is an abomination to God, continue in its celebration, as to do otherwise brings ridicule from friends and loved ones, and everybody is aware of what happens when you say, I'm not going to keep Christian anymore, the roots are pagan, and you get all kinds of responses. One of the most interesting response is, it doesn't really matter. It's Christian. It's Christmas. It's a time of joy. It's a time of. Basically, it's amazing that the blinders come over. People, the desire to have a relationship with Elohim goes out the door, and this is something that I found, especially teaching Christians, that you can teach them throughout the year, and they just grasp, but when December comes around, it all falls away. And it's the same thing with Jews. Jews are no different. They've fallen into the same thing that I have families in Massachusetts. They're Reformed Jews. They put up a Christmas tree because it's Christmas time, you know. So pastors and preachers who know the truth about it will not speak out against it for the same reasons and for the fear of losing their jobs. Yahshua spoke true when he told the Samaritan woman, you worship what you don't understand. All understanding is lost during this time, as if this pagan worship overrides any scriptural truths. In a sense, scriptures go out the door. The Bible no longer matters. And I see this. I'm not, maybe nobody else sees it, but it's a very difficult time. People become totally blind to the scriptures and to the historical fact. How can something so joyous be wrong? So let's consider the following scenario, this directly from the Torah, from Bereshit 3. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which Yahweh Elohim had made. And he said unto the woman, Yes, has Elohim said, You shall not eat of any tree of the garden. What did Elohim say? From every tree of the garden you may freely eat. And the woman said unto the serpent, Of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. She didn't pay attention because she took away. From every tree of the garden you may freely eat. But of the fruit tree, of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, Elohim has said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. We read earlier on that the tree that was in the midst of the garden was the tree of life. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die. For Elohim does know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and you shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil. And here's the kicker. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat. She knew that Elohim had said not to eat it, even though she had corrupted Scripture saying not just eat it or don't touch it. Not that she didn't recognize that the tree in the middle of the garden was the tree of life. The fact was Elohim said, don't do this. But she saw that it was pleasant. She saw that it was beautiful. She saw that it was something that she desired. And that desire overran her ability to see that the word of Elohim takes precedence over everything. And she took of it, and she did eat, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. And this is a very, very important point, that the spirit of things will pervert the actual physical worship of things. You bring a false spiritual idea into your worship, then your worship is also going to become perverted. Okay? And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves girdles. And this is a huge statement. The fig leaf in Judaism represents prosperity. It represents wealth. What did they see? They saw they were naked. They saw that they didn't have the glory of Elohim. So what did they do? They put together something dealing with their own prosperity and their own wealth to cover up the fact that that spiritual nature of Elohim had left them. Something that covers up the word of Elohim, the walk that we have with Elohim, is removed, and you replace it with glitter and glamour. And it's just like we read earlier, that the man says, in fact, let me go back to it, the man says that I'm going to walk in such a way, though it goes contrary to the word of Elohim, and I'm going to have peace, because in my mind it's okay. But Elohim says, no, it's not. You're going to have to go through the curses that are written in this book, and I will remove your name from the book. So it's a very serious thing. But we see that Satan is very subtle. The Satan is subtle, and the same thought that went through the woman's head is the very question just posed. We read a few excerpts from the Torah of Elohim, and we read that we are not to incorporate anything from the idolatry of the nation. Christians should know this. The many Jews who now celebrate the Christmas holiday should know this. A question to ask should be this: do I believe that Elohim is real? And that's the main question. Do I even believe that Elohim is real? If the answer is yes, then his word is also real, and it clearly says not to do what the nations do. This is what Yahweh told Ezekiel, and he, in a way, said that things like what we've just talked about would come about. And he said unto me, Go in and behold the wicked abominations that they do here. So I went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping things and abominable beasts and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about. And there stood before them 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel. And in the midst of them stood Jaazaniah, the son of Shaphan. Okay? This is an interesting thing. Jaazaniah means that Yahweh is present, but Shaphan means that he is concealed. He's there, but you can't see him. He's there, but you ignore him. Okay? With every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. Then said he unto me, Son of man, have you seen that the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the chambers of his imagery? Who all should have the censers that send up the incense? It belongs to the priesthood, but every man has it. And every man is considering themselves a priest. But they're in their dark chambers with their imagination going on. And what are they saying? For they say, Yahweh does not see us. Yahweh has forsaken the earth. Well, nobody needs to know. God doesn't see what we're doing. We can hide it from God. We can do anything we want because we can dictate what is and what is not. The question goes back, do you believe that Elohim exists? Because if not, then you can do whatever you want. But if you do, then his instruction holds, it's solid. So he says, Yahweh does not see us. Yahweh has forsaken the earth. He said also unto me, Turn yourself yet again, and you shall see greater abominations that they do. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of Yahweh's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat a woman weeping for Tammuz. Now this is an interesting thing. Nimrod was the father of Tammuz by Bacchus, his mother, and Nimrod is portrayed as the stump, but Tammuz is portrayed as a tree growing out of the stump. And in the worship of Tammuz, they would hang, and this is kind of maybe a little bit too much information, but they would hang balls in pairs on the tree in order to worship Nimrod, who was also the deity of fertility, and these actually represented the male parts that brought forth procreation. So we have another illustration of the worship of Tammuz within the tree, but there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Tammuz died and was resurrected. Adonis died. Adonis is another name for Tammuz, another sun deity who died and was resurrected. Adis died and was resurrected. And all of these were meshed eventually into Dios Sol Invictus, who became the one deity of Rome, the unconquerable sun. So, now, then said he unto me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Turn yourself again. I imagine Ezekiel's getting dizzy by now. And you shall hear greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of Yahweh's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of Yahweh, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs towards the temple of Yahweh, and their faces towards the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. Jeremiah, we're told that praying towards the east is an abomination to Yahweh Elohim. They're praying towards the sun, the rising sun. Okay? Or is it the setting sun? Anyway, they're praying to the sun, the rising sun. Then he said unto me, Have you seen this, O son of man? It is a like thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here. Or is it a like thing that they commit the abominations that they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger, and lo, they put the branch to their nose. In what became the Christ Mass, when they were worshiping the goddess of fertility, the reborn son was also called the man of the branch. So it was not very difficult to twist scripture and say that the branch was born of Mary on Christ Mass. So we see a lot of things that we find in bits and pieces throughout Tanakh that are incorporated, but like we say, we can't just take a single verse here and make it explain everything. We have to understand what happened in Bereshis. We have to understand what happened in the writings in the prophets. We have to understand what Yahshua was talking about before we can understand what the Talmudim or Paul is talking about. We have to have the whole story, the beginning, the middle, and the end, to have truth. Now, keeping what we've just read in mind, Paul tells Timothy, again, we've read this a couple of times, but we see how the scripture keeps coming out over and over and over. He says, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, not set apart, in other words, not set apart to Elohim, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of Yahweh, having a form of reverence, having a form of righteousness, but denying the power of it. He says, from these turn away. This describes Black Friday to a T. So, just had to throw that in there. But we see that the debauchery, the lawlessness, the craziness that took place at Saturnalia, we see the lack of keeping the Torah here in Ezekiel. And then we see what Timothy wrote. And Joshua said that in these days would come false prophets teaching all kinds of funky, wigged out, whacked out things. He said, don't listen to them. And we have exactly what happened around 313 to 336. This is one of the most difficult falsehoods to let go of and ultimately to overcome. Is Elohim real to you? Do you believe his word? Ultimately, only you can decide to worship Yahweh Elohim in truth according to his word and instruction, or not. To keep the traditions of men, or to keep the commandments of Yahweh Elohim. Now, say we're studying where the doctrines came from. We're taking a look at where the things that are held dear came from. And we're starting to get a picture that maybe, just maybe, what the church fathers have told us, what the rabbis told us, maybe these things aren't exactly on the level. So, any questions on this? Actually, I read about poinsettias, but I didn't write it down. So it's a pretty flower, but I don't know. You know, you look up poinsettias and Saturnalia when you're online. It'll, if it's there, and if it's part of the whole gig, it's going to explode and tell you all about it.